Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. Just so that you know you're in the right place, you have logged on to the Strategic Communications and Framing webinar for youth. This is Mitria from the Network for a Healthy California, the Children and Youth team. I work directly with the Youth Engagement Initiative. Before we dive into the webinar, we wanted to take care of a few housekeeping items. Please take a moment to write down this phone number just in case you have any technical difficulties. The number is 866-229-3239, and that's the direct number to WebEx. So if you're having any technical difficulties, they can walk you through troubleshooting for a solution. This webinar will be recorded and made available online, shared with all of you shortly after. Probably you can look for something next week or following the holiday. All of your lines have been placed on mute mode, but we are asking that you submit questions to us via the chat box. So you'll see a chat box in your bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Feel free to use that. Send questions directly to the Network for a Healthy California. We'll be addressing all questions at the end of the webinar, so keep them coming throughout the process. We're really excited to welcome you to the webinar today. Berkeley Media Studies Group, most of you may know them as BMSG, is an organization that's dedicated to expanding the ability of the community to improve the systems that determine health for that community. They were founded in 1993, and since then they've worked with a range of different organizations, from public health professionals to grassroots organizations, on a range of important issues, always helping individuals, including youth, make their voice heard in powerful public forums. This is the first of a series of trainings that we're bringing to you from with BMSG, and we're really excited that they're available to help with this. Please watch for 3 in-person trainings coming in August, 1 in Monterey, 1 in San Bernardino, and 1 in Contra Costa County, as well as a part 2 to this webinar coming in September. Save the dates, and registration for all of these opportunities will be coming to you soon. One last reminder, if you have any technical difficulties, call WebEx directly at 866-229-3239 and submit questions throughout the presentation directly to the Network for a Healthy California using the chat box. With that said, I'd like to turn it over to Ingrid Daffner-Krasnow. Ingrid.
Great. Thanks so much, Mitria, and to Lloyd and to the whole Network for a Healthy California for inviting me and for inviting Berkeley Media Studies Group to be a part of this really fantastic partnership. We have been just so pleased with the collaboration that we've been involved in, and are excited to get to know all of the folks on the phone, as well as other folks who are going to be joining us for the in-person trainings and for the follow-up webinar at the end of the summer. BMSG does a few different things. First and foremost, we do these kinds of trainings, both online and in person, working with community groups, like Mitria said, departments of health, folks all over the country, really, to learn about how to use the media and strategic communications as a vehicle for community change and community support. So we're always excited to be learning about new projects that are going on throughout the country, and obviously in California in particular, since that's our home base. In addition to the trainings, we also do research on different public health issues and look at how the media is portraying those issues, and how folks working on community change efforts can learn from what's going on in the media in order to reframe their messages and to be really strategic about affecting change. And then finally, we also do professional education for journalists. So we've worked with journalists in the past, to really educate them on a strong public health approach to their reporting and to their writing, with the goal in mind that the news stories that we start to see in our newspapers, or that we hope to continue to see, really reflect more of a systems change angle, and really affect the community efforts that are going on. And we're going to talk more about sort of the role of reporters and the role of news throughout this presentation. So just a little bit more about this partnership. I think folks probably either already familiar, or Mitria also just gave a really nice summary. But we're really happy to be working with the Network for a Healthy California to support all of the nutrition and physical activity efforts that are going on throughout the state. And this is really, as Mitria described, our mission. This is really in line with our goals and our objectives as an organization, so we feel like this is a really fantastic partnership. I wanted to also encourage folks to ask questions throughout the webinar. We'll be stopping at various points to address your questions, but we don't want to prevent anyone from sending in questions while you're thinking about them. So please go ahead and type in any questions that you might have to your chat box, and we'll be fielding those at intermediate points throughout the webinar. And we just really want this to be as interactive and as engaging as possible. No one wants to sit and listen to someone talk to them for an hour and a half, nor do I want to be that person. So please, let's make sure that this is a dialogue. And one of the things that we love about trainings, both online and in person, is that we learn as much from the community as we have to share with you all about strategic communications. And because we are going to be working together in this fantastic partnership, this is really a wonderful opportunity to get that conversation going, to learn about some of your particular goals and objectives, and learn how BMSG can support that work. Here's just a little bit of information about the Network for a Healthy California and the amazing work that it's been doing for a long time, including starting 6 pilot sites in 2006 and growing up to 43 youth groups today. The youth outreach component of the network's work is really inspiring, and we're really very excited to be a part of the youth outreach work and engaging youth and supporting youth voices in community change efforts. And so we want to make sure that you all know about these resources. And again, Mitria is a wonderful source of information should you be looking for anything in addition. So just a quick review of the goals. I'm not going to read these, but I'll just let you look at them for a moment just to sort of digest. But in quick summary, we're going to talk about strategic communication and why it's important in systems change goals. We're also going to start to build some skills to frame messages around systems change, and also really begin the conversation about how youth can get involved and how youth can be developing messages to advance their own goals and to really be, at the helm of changing the communities in positive ways. So I just want to take a brief moment now for a poll. In our effort to get to know folks on the phone, we'd like to ask you to check all of the boxes in this poll here that reflect your current area of focus. So if you're doing something that corresponds to A through G in this poll, please check every box. And we'd love to learn a little bit more about what folks are doing before we get started. So let's give you a few seconds to complete the poll. Okay, I'm going to assume that by now most people have had a chance to complete that poll. So the poll has now ended, and now we're going to get a chance to look at the responses. It may take a moment just to calculate those responses, so I'm going to just get us set up to begin our next discussion. There we go, there it is. Okay, so let's see what we have here. This is exciting. So it looks like access to healthy food is above and beyond, the area of focus most prevalent in the group. Second only to that is healthy beverages, so food and beverages definitely go hand in hand. Physical activity is a close third with 55%. And then it looks like the next one down is actually the CX3 work and the obesity prevention work included in that. So that's all along the same lines. And then we're seeing some work on school wellness policies, which is fantastic. I'm excited to hear more about that. And finally, access to farmers markets and corner store convergence. So these are all issues that BMSG has worked on with community groups in the past, and something that we have a good deal of content knowledge on, but we're always looking to learn more and learn about new initiatives that are going on in the community. So we're really excited to learn about some of the specific efforts that that are being undertaken through the Network for a Healthy California support and in the state departments of health, et cetera. Excuse me, the local departments of health. So we're just going to keep these themes in the back of our mind, and we'll get back to some of the more specific content areas throughout the webinar. But I want to change gears a little bit now to really talk about where the news comes into community change work. So the news does a few different things. The first one is it really sets the agenda for what we think about, meaning those conversations that we have with our family at the dinner table and with colleagues, you know, in the lunchroom, et cetera, oftentimes come about out of what's being reported in the news. You know, there have been a lot of really major Supreme Court cases coming down this week that I'm sure have been influencing discussion throughout, you know, workplaces and in family dining rooms, et cetera. So it really shapes what we're thinking about. And the converse to that is also true. What's not in the news doesn't mean that we're not thinking about it, but it may be less prevalent in our minds because that space is being taken up by what is making the news. It also shapes how we think about things. So the way that a story is told in the news, and when I say news, I mean traditional newspapers, radio, and broadcast television, but I also mean blogs and social networking sites and Twitter and all of the podcasts, all of the many, many news outlet sources that we now have at our disposal in what we call the 24-hour news cycle. So there's no shortage of news. Which means that there's an incredible opportunity for the news to shape how we think about things. We're constantly being bombarded with information, and the way that information is framed is going to affect the way we think about it. And finally, it's also going to affect what we do about it. So the news has a very big role to play in reaching decision makers and opinion leaders and affecting the way they think about things and ultimately affecting what they do about it. And it also can affect the way that we, as community members, can take action. So today we're going to talk about the news in the context of Berkeley Media Studies Group's layers of strategy. And our layers of strategy is really the foundation of our approach to creating public health and community change through strategic communications. So we're going to focus today, as you can see, on message strategy, that big bolded layer at the third bullet point. But I want to just walk quickly through what the other layers are so that you all can sort of put message strategy into context. And we're going to go into these even more in depth in our in-person training. So we really hope everyone on the phone has a chance to make it to one of those regional trainings that are going to be throughout California so that we can talk a little bit more about how the layers of strategy can inform your work. The first one is overall strategy. And when we talk about overall strategy, we're essentially talking about answering three key questions. Essentially, what's the problem, what's the solution, and who needs to do something about it? So we're asking ourselves, what is the solution that we're trying to implement in our community to create change, and who has responsibility for that? Is it a local school board? Is it the city council? Is it at a state level? Is it perhaps at a federal level? So who's in a position of power to make that change? And knowing the answer to those questions is going to be a key part to informing the rest of the layers of strategy. We often say it's very hard to have a media or a message strategy without an overall strategy because you don't know what you want to say if you don't first know what you want to do, right? That's sort of our tagline that we always remind folks about. We get a lot of calls asking for specific strategic communications advice, and we'll say, well, what are you trying to achieve? What's your goal? And folks say, well, I can't tell you exactly what the solution might be, but I can tell you I'm really angry that the park near my house has broken street lights, and my kids can't play there because it's too dark, and I don't feel comfortable with them out after dark. And so we say, well, once you come up with a solution, a proposed solution to that problem, then we can have a conversation about message and media. But until we can really identify what you want to do about it, it's really hard to know what you want to say. So we'll get more into depth in that in our in-person trainings. But from there, we move to media strategy. And essentially this is asking yourselves, is using the media as a vehicle for community change going to be a strong effort? Is it going to benefit the work that you all are doing? And sometimes the answer can be yes, and sometimes the answer can be no. And it may change even for small, different components on a particular issue. And I'll give you an example. I actually work outside of California and live in a small rural county in Wyoming, and we had an outbreak of norovirus here recently from up in Yellowstone Park. And the local public health department was doing a lot of work out in the community to address the concern about the spread of norovirus, but it hadn't done any kind of communications work around what it was doing to address the problem. And so there were some issues related to a lack of communication from the public health department because folks didn't know what was going on. So in that particular case, it would have been better to have a stronger media strategy. Now, in some cases, it's actually better to maybe fly under the media radar and have direct meetings one-on-one with people in positions of power to make change. And so we want to make sure that you're making an informed decision about how you're going to be using your communication strategies to affect the change that you're seeking. And then we're going to get to message strategy today. So this is really asking yourself those same three questions from overall strategy. What's the problem? What's the solution? Why does it matter? And we're going to talk about that in depth today. What are the values associated with the solution that you're proposing? And who's responsible for making that change? And this is where we really get into words on paper and wordsmithing and thinking very strategically about our audience, thinking about who needs to be our messenger, thinking about what are the things that our audience needs to hear in order to inspire action. So those are all aspects of message strategy that we're going to get into today. And then finally, access strategy. And this comes back around to media and to your audience. How are you going to get the folks in positions of power or who you, it may not be that you're trying to create that you're trying to get action at an institutional level, but maybe you're trying to get partnership with other local organizations, and so you need to cultivate relationships with folks. You need to be really on the ground talking to people. So how are you going to get those meetings? How are you going to establish those relationships? What's going to inspire them to participate in the work that you're doing, to partner with you, or to listen to the solutions that you're proposing or that you're supporting? So the reason that we're focusing on message strategy is because the way the network talks about its systems change goals will impact the outcomes. And this is true for both young people and adults. We know that having the support of key stakeholders will impact whether your efforts will fail or succeed. So we want to make sure that the way that we're talking about our systems change work is going to be most effective. So developing those strong messages to gain that support from stakeholders is one of the most important aspects of a strong strategy. So just getting more into depth here on message strategy. So we want to ask, what's the problem or issue and the solution, and who has the power to make the change? But we also want to ask questions like, who must be mobilized? You know, when we're talking about youth engagement, have we worked with young people to identify the solutions that they think are the most important to address this problem? Is this problem something that young people think is really a really important problem to address in the first place? What do the audiences that we're focusing on, our targeted groups, whether they're organizations with whom we want to partner or coalitions or folks in positions who can affect change, what do they need to hear and who do they need to hear it from? And we're going to talk more about engaging young people in the process so that the solutions are really coming directly from young people in the community and so that they can have a strong voice in these systems change efforts. So we're going to go through an example, and this will be the first of a few examples we talk about on the webinar today. We know that people really want to have a model to work after, so we're using this as just as an example. So what is the problem or issue? As an example, many California schools don't have access to clean drinking water. Often water fountains are dirty or broken, and it costs too much money for many students to buy clean bottled water every day. What's the solution? Well, a couple of solutions would be to install hydration stations in schools or repair and improve the maintenance on current water fountains. And who has the power to make that change? The school board, essentially, which needs to allocate funding for water fountains and hydration stations. So you'll notice that in this message, there are very specific points made about what the problem and the solution and who has the power to make the change. And we'll talk about some of the downfalls of message development is sometimes people want to talk very big picture. And when you leave out the really specific details, it can often leave people without a sense of who's going to do what about this problem. And so we want to make sure that we're really sending a strong message of the solution that we want to see in place and who has the power to create that solution. So to go on, the same few questions, who must be mobilized to affect change? Students, school principals, teachers, and parents. Those are 4 groups. There probably are other potentially involved parties, but those are probably the strongest ones who would have an effect on this conversation. What do targeted groups need to hear? Well, first of all, they need to know that students want and deserve free and clean drinking water. This may seem like a no-brainer for many folks on the phone and parents and educators, but sometimes folks need to be reminded that not everybody has that, and everyone deserves to have clean drinking water. And just a reminder also that what the lack of clean drinking water could mean for some students, meaning it could affect health and it could also affect student academic performance and safety. And again, this is oftentimes the conversation is not only about what should be done, but also what could happen if nothing is done. And that reminder is very important in your messaging. And then finally, from whom do those audiences need to hear this message? Well, students, first and foremost, because those are the ones who are most impacted by the problem, but also principals and teachers who will have something to say about how lack of drinking water could have an impact on academic performance. And finally, parents, of course, because they're going to be ultimately concerned about their children's well-being. Again, the idea around message strategy is not only answering these questions, but answering them very strategically to provide concise answers that really get to the heart of what you're asking for or the support that you're trying to offer to a community effort that's going on, or the partnerships that you're trying to establish with other community groups. So being very specific about what kind of change you're seeking. So I want to take a moment to do a quick exercise here around framing. And we talked a little bit about framing in the beginning, and we're going to talk about framing as we go through and how it affects message and message strategy. So for just a moment, if folks can type into the chat boxes what they think it says behind this blue box.
Okay, it looks like a lot of folks are messaging that it says prevention.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing that, but I'm glad that it's visible. So prevention. So that's what most people see when they look at this blue box. But in fact, when we take the blue box away, we see that it doesn't say prevention. It actually is just garbled letters all put together. Now, what's going on here? Because even though I know how this little trick works, I still see prevention when I put that blue box up. Essentially what's happening is that our brain is filling in the 50% of the information that's missing based on our own background, our own experience, the fact that everyone on the phone is interested in health and prevention of health problems and things like that. So this is a word that is very meaningful to all of us on the phone, and so therefore it would be easy for us to see this word. The challenge with this kind of problem, with only having 50% of the information and filling in the rest without knowing what's going on, is that this is often what happens when we look at how to address community health problems. That when we are out in the community and when leaders in our community see what's going on, and just as a natural default, as a human trait, we oftentimes ascribe responsibility for a problem to a population that may not actually be responsible for that problem. And what happens more often than not is that based on what we call the default frame, especially here in the United States, is that people assign responsibility to the individual for addressing those problems. So when we talk about wanting to create healthier eating environments and creating more farmers markets and healthy menus in schools and drinking fountains and things like that, we oftentimes will say, well, parents really are responsible for packing healthier lunches for their kids or making sure that their kids go to school with clean drinking water. And while parents, of course, have a role to play, The problem with that perspective, with that default frame, is that it doesn't, and I know that I'm not saying anything that's new to anyone on the phone, but this is just related to how we're going to talk about message strategy. The problem with that default frame falling on the individual is that it doesn't take into account the systems and the structures that are in place that make creating healthy lunches and safe drinking water a possibility for all families. And so we know that there are many communities throughout California that don't have access to clean drinking water because the groundwater in their communities is somehow contaminated, or that the grocery store in their communities is so far away that once they get home from work, there's no way they can get there on time and get back to make dinner or to pack a healthy lunch for their kids, or that fresh produce is so expensive, or that EBT cards are not accepted at their farmer's market, that they can't actually buy it, that it's actually it's prohibitive for them to buy healthy food for their families, and so they go for lower cost options to make sure that bellies are full. And so we know that there are all sorts of systems challenges that are preventing healthy outcomes in our communities. But what the problem is that not everyone is going to see that same issue, and so we need to be developing stronger messages so that we can address these problems and bring everyone on board with the systems change approach that we all care so much about. And so there's a need to reframe here from this, you can see from this balance, there's a heavier weight on personal responsibility than on institutional accountability. And this is the case not only in our own minds when we think about who's responsible for certain problems, but it's also the case in the media. And we know through research that about 80% of news stories that we know of in the media have more of an individual personal responsibility frame. And so we have a bit of work to do to make sure that news stories are really reflecting the approaches that we all on the phone care so much about in terms of creating systems change that's going to help larger populations of people and not just individuals one by one. We know that news stories or news outlets love to report on that feel-good human interest story about someone who went to the gym every day and changed their diet and did all these amazing things and was able to lose weight and get healthier and avoid diabetes and things like that. But we also know that that's one story. And we know that not everyone is going to have the systems in place and the structures in place to support those kinds of changes. And so what can we do about that at a larger population level? So we reviewed some of this already, but just to reiterate, especially in low-income communities, we know that health is more of this environmental issue. And by environmental, I know I don't need to explain this to folks on the phone, but we're not talking about, you know, green practices and recycling. We're really talking about the environment in which we live. So lack of access to healthy food, clean and safe places to play or exercise will clearly result in poor nutrition and lack of physical activity, which has poor health implications. And then also educating communities about the importance of healthy eating and exercise is important, but grocery stores and parks and creating stronger community stronger community resources are going to be what we need in place to help families achieve their goals. So I want to just take a moment here to see where's the next step. We're just going to review sort of what we can do, understanding about how the issue is currently framed. We want to translate an individual problem to a social issue, so taking it out of that default frame of an individual. Assigning responsibility for a policy or for any kind of solution, and we've talked about some of those already. Articulating values is very important, and we're going to get into that in just a moment. And then illustrating the landscape with story elements, essentially how to make your issue more engaging to either the news media or a partnership opportunity, etc. I want to just take a break here and field some questions, and I am not sure I can see everything in the chat box because I couldn't see all those prevention answers.
Yeah, Heather, I've got a question actually on our end. Can you hear me?
Yes, okay. I can hear you.
Awesome. So when you're thinking about youth that want, say, a healthy food or a healthy restaurant in their neighborhood, how would you approach crafting their message for a private sector business? Does that make sense?
I want to know, and this may be a more in-depth question that we should get into in a little bit, but before I do that, I want to know, what is the goal of engaging the private sector business?
To improve the the options that are being provided by that organization to healthier options for the community.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this is sort of like a corner store convergence sort of type of, corner store conversion sort of approach, where you want to make sure that businesses are stocking their shelves with fresh fruits and vegetables and things like that?
Correct, or a restaurant.
Sure. So we're going to talk about values in just a few minutes. And this, when we talk about messaging, and especially to business, this kind of question comes up for us all the time. How do I engage business in my public health efforts? And one of the big, the primary answer to this comes down to creating a message that has very strong values that are going to resonate with that business. And so we know through working with many communities throughout California, throughout the country on this kind of work and on corner store conversion messaging and things like that, that many, many times small business owners like corner stores are in their own communities. Those are folks who live in those communities, who care about the health of their communities, and sometimes they just need a little gentle reminder about the mission of providing a service to their community. So creating a message that includes the values of stronger communities, meaning healthier options mean stronger communities, that businesses have a role to play in providing healthy produce and healthy options for their local community members, for their fellow community members, can often be a very strong message for local businesses. So the values that resonate with the particular local business in your community, that's something that you on the phone and you and your communities are going to know better than anybody else. And sometimes that's going to take a little investigation. And we've done work with folks, again, throughout California. There's an amazing youth group in Chula Vista in San Diego County who did a whole community needs assessment to identify all the local stores in their community to figure out what folks were providing, what were the goals and the values of those particular businesses, and how could those local corner stores support creating this kind of environment where folks had healthier foods in those corner stores. And so it's really about having those conversations, establishing relationships with business owners to figure out where their values are, and then developing messages that reflect those values that can bring your particular community change goals in line with the values of your target. And again, these are really smart questions that we're going to get into even more depth in the in-person training, and have an opportunity to really put pen to paper and work on developing some strong messages around this. So thanks for that question. Is there another question?
I don't think so, not at this time.
Okay, thanks, Mitria.
No problem.
We'll continue on with our presentation, but we came in just at the right time around values. So we've listed a few values here that could potentially inspire youth or resonate with your particular audience. Those values being equity, honesty, health, or safety. And we're going to talk about how to express those values and why the expression of values is so important in messaging. But again, using your chat, what other values can you think of that would be strong and that would resonate with the audiences that you're trying to address, whether it's business owners, whether it's school officials, whether it's farmers market representatives, anyone in your community who might be a target for your systems change goals?
I'm just going to kind of read off because I know you can't see all of these, Ingrid, but we're getting, you know, community pride, fiscal savings, profit. I think some of them may be going to Heather as well.
Yeah, sustainability and community are a couple of that came in.
Great, thank you. So community pride, sustainability, fiscal, I don't remember that one exactly. Profit I know was one. What was the one about fiscal responsibility? No.
Fiscal savings.
Fiscal savings. Oh, okay. So we have profit and savings. Great. So, and does anyone want to weigh in with specifically maybe these are values that would resonate with youth, but are there any other values that folks on the phone think might be really important to young people in the community?
We're getting respect. I think that just being truthful and honest, which is already up there.
Also voice and teamwork.
Environmentalism.
School pride.
Great. So these are all really fantastic values, and I think the ones that I want to highlight the most for the purpose of this webinar is the one of voice in messaging, and why that's so important, and especially engaging youth in the process of creating community change. We know that young people, and I have a 2-year-old who seems to want to voice her opinion to me all the time, and maybe she's not quite at the level of wanting to create systems change, but I definitely have a sense of how young people, being one myself, maybe more than a few years ago at this point, but remembering those days clearly, wanting to feel that their voice is heard, and that the people in their community who are in positions of power to create change are hearing those concerns that are coming from young people. And not only the concerns, but the solutions. Many of the solutions that we can implement in our community to improve our health and our well-being, young people are thinking of those, and they're the ones who have those solutions that they know are going to resonate with other youth. And so making sure that we're honoring that voice and really including young people in the very beginning of this process of systems change is one of the most important things we can do to create solutions that are going to benefit young people, benefit all of our communities, but also make sure that the messages that we are sending to people like cornerstone owners, et cetera, are coming from the youth perspective, which is going to have stronger weight. And so we're going to spend a few minutes now developing some messages and really seeing how we implement these values in our messages. So again, going back to those layers of strategy, the 3 pieces of a message, the key pieces, what's wrong, why does it matter, and what should be done. And then most importantly, and this is something we can't forget, who are you sending this message to? And ultimately the answer should be whoever is in a position of either supporting the work that you're doing on the ground or partnering with you, or maybe someone who's in a position of creating change in their community, like a business owner or a school board. So always remembering who your audience is. So we're going to go through an example here. So what's wrong? Mountain View Middle School students and families have to walk through and around uneven dirt walkways, flood-damaged and mud-covered trails, and often have to illegally jaywalk across a busy highway to get to and from school. So this is an actual case study that came out of Kern County that we want to highlight and acknowledge all their hard work. Why does it matter? These conditions make it unsafe for students and families to walk to and from school. Walking to school could create regular opportunities for the family to get physical activity if it were safe. Again, this is going back to what's the problem, but what happens if nothing is done? Why does this matter so much? And what could come if we do solve this problem? People could be getting more exercise. What needed to be done, again, this is something that's already been done, so we're talking about it in the past. The Stay Alive, Stay Healthy youth team at Mountain View Middle School asked the Kern County Roads Department to fix the walkway to school and add a crosswalk in Lamont. And now students and families can walk to school safely. So their ask was to fix this walkway and to add a crosswalk so that people could get across the street. So it's very specific about the change that they were seeking. A lot of times when we say what needs to be done, we hear responses like, well, the community needs to come together to create change. And while we believe that's true, we're very much about community-oriented change, and we know that everyone on the phone is as well, including that sort of big picture concept in a message, especially if you only have a limited opportunity to send a message, whether it's a short meeting, et cetera, when you say something like the community needs to come together or something sort of big picture, it doesn't relay any level of accountability or sense of a specific ask that can really affect change. And so at the end of the day, no one feels accountable for creating that change. So what's great about this example is that the SASH program, the SASH youth team, made a very specific ask to a very specific entity, the Kern County Roads Department, and their specific ask was fixing the walkway. And so it was very clear what the Kern County Roads Department needed to do if they were going to honor this request. So that's another thing that's important. What is the ask that you're making, and is your target clear on what you're asking of them? So we talked for a moment about why youth are so important. And, you know, I don't think that anyone on the phone needs a reminder of this, but just to talk a little bit about engaging youth sort of from the beginning and why it makes such a difference in developing those solutions and coming up with messages that are really from the youth voice or the youth perspective and that incorporate youth values so that the community knows where these ideas are coming from and that youth feel really engaged in this process. And so we know that youth are directly affected by many of the problems that we're working on today in terms of school safety and food access and drinking water and places to play and things like that. Youth really speak to the future. You know, they are where we're headed, and we want to make sure that we're creating an environment for our young people so that they can grow up in healthy communities. So they really need to be at the table from that very first conversation in order to have their priorities included. And then from there will be youth who will become some of the best spokespersons that you could ever ask for because these ideas are coming directly from them. And their voice is going to come through with a sense of integrity and a sense of honesty because these are their solutions. And so it makes sense that they would be delivering these messages because they are the ones who are really seeking out these solutions. So when we talk about working with young people to become strong spokespersons, here are just a few tips on what folks can do to begin to work with youth in order to create those strong messaging skills. Again, just as a reminder, really important that they're at the table from the very beginnings. It's not fair to young people, and it's not going to be an effective campaign strategy to bring young people in at the end, just as a mouthpiece for your personal systems change approach. Really, young people need to be there from the very beginning. But knowing your goals for the system change approach is very, very important. So these are all these are tips that you can use to help youth become spokesperson. Reminding them to stay on message. Sometimes if you have a limited amount of time, it's hard to know how much information to include and how much to leave out. And one of the things that we say at Berkeley Media Studies Group is that you can't be comprehensive and strategic at the same time. Really, there are going to be things that you're going to have to leave out, and it's so hard, I know, for public health experts sometimes to not include all of the information, all of the data and the statistics in their messages. But really what we need to focus on are what are the few pieces of information that our audience needs to hear in order to get the conversation going to that next level. And then once we are sort of engaged with people, then we maybe have an opportunity to present some of that background information. But from a messaging perspective, we really want to be as succinct as possible in staying on message. Speaking to shared values, we've talked a lot about that this morning already and why that is so important. When people are affected sort of at an emotional level, the research shows that beyond statistics and data, affecting people from a place of values is really one of the most critical ways to inspire change and inspire action. So the data ultimately will come second to speaking from a values perspective because people will use the data to support their own beliefs already. And so we want to make sure that we're speaking to shared values. Again, resist the urge to say everything. This sort of goes with staying on message. You may have a lot of information that you could share, but it's about being selective about what information you're going to put out there to make sure that folks are engaged to get to that next level of the conversation with you. Stick to your expertise. So maybe there's a young person who knows a lot about the city planning codes and what it might take to put street lights, put lights in the park or to clean up the park in some way. And so if they have knowledge and expertise on that, then that's great. But that may be a conversation that's better left to some of your city planning colleagues. And so making sure that the folks who you have sending your message know that if they don't know the answer to a question, that's okay. and that they're really relaying information that they have expertise on, and that if a question comes in they may not know the answer to, they can easily say, that's a fantastic question. Let me get back to you on that with some information from one of my colleagues. Preparing for hard questions is also critical. And so one of the things we know is that when you're getting ready to either go in for an interview or you might have an opportunity, you know that you might run into someone you know at the next coalition meeting who might be interested in this issue, and they're going to ask you some tough questions. Be prepared in advance for those questions. Make a list of those questions that keep you up at night that you say, oh gosh, I hope nobody asks me this because I might not have the answer. Figure out how you are going to answer those questions and do practice with your colleagues. And when you're working with young people, help them practice their answers to these questions and to know what those questions are in advance. And we know that answering questions in an interview format or in any kind of public speaking venue, the most successful public speakers are often people who do it all the time, and that's because it also ultimately becomes muscle memory, because these are ideas that you've had in the back of your head for many, many years or for many, many practice sessions, and so you know that you can rely on that practice that you've done over that period of time to get you to the right answer. Providing compelling examples. So people, this is going back to our old kindergarten 101 sort of show and tell. We want to make sure that we're really giving people a picture of the community that we want to create. Oftentimes, when we're dealing with folks who may not have exposure or experience of the problems that we're trying to address in our community, they can't envision the issues that you're talking about, especially people who are not in some of these low-income communities that may not, that may have plenty of parks and grocery stores in their neighborhoods, and so they can't even imagine a world where someone might have to get on 2 buses to go to the grocery store, or someone might have drug paraphernalia in their park and have it be too unsafe for their kids to go play. So we need to make sure to paint a picture and give examples to our audience so that they know what we're talking about. Use reasonable and clear language. So again, especially for public health and for community change advocates, it's really easy to get into that jargon. And we want to just encourage folks just to use simple language that, your smart 13-year-old daughter or your great uncle who doesn't really know much about your work, doesn't know about public health, could understand what you're talking about. Just very simple, easy to understand language. Following up is key. So once you have that first conversation, make sure that you stay in touch with the folks who you're talking to so that you can continue to build that relationship. And then finally, and especially with youth, showing your support, making sure that they know that you are behind them 100%, and that when they do have those questions that come up that they may not be able to answer, that you're behind them and that you can either get that information for them or you can give them the training and the skills they need to help answer those questions. So I think that's the end of our formal presentation. Again, I want to open up the last round of questions before we move on to sort of our closing remarks. And again, I'm going to ask for support from Mitria and Heather to sort of help me field these questions.
Absolutely. If you have any last-minute questions for Ingrid, please go ahead and send those directly using the chat box to the Network for a Healthy California, or I know that some of you have been sending them directly to Heather, the host. Either one of those is good. While we're waiting for those to go through, for last-minute questions to come in, or I have an audience in my room. If you have any, please share. We'd like to share a few different resources with you as well. For those of you that are on the line engaging in youth engagement work, you saw in the beginning of the presentation, Ingrid went over a slide that talked about the network resources that are available online, and you can always contact me, Mitria, with the Network Children and Youth team if you need access to those. But also here are a few other good resources if you're looking for additional resources to help you with your youth engagement work. Also, we always want to make sure that you know that the network is here to support you with questions and guidance, however we can help. So as you're starting to plan your policy systems and environmental change strategies, if you have questions, feel free to contact Lisa Tadlock or Betty Sun, who are both available to help you with questions and answers. And as you're working on youth engagement, if you have questions or need guidance in that realm, Emily Perez and myself are always available for guidance as well. I see that we are getting a few different questions coming in. Let me see. Ingrid, the question is, can you talk about using youth to conduct PSE change work? Can you talk about how you use youth to conduct PSE change work?
Sure. I mean, that's a big question to answer in this format. But we are going to be going in the in-person trainings. We are going to be talking about strategies to support the work that you all are doing to engage youth and to bring them into this to your work, to make sure that they're partners at the table with you. I think one of the things that's the most important just to remember, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, so sorry to be repeating myself, but really making sure that young people are at the table from the very beginning, and that they are bringing up the problems that you're trying to address, and they are coming up with some of the solutions. It doesn't mean that adult professionals in the room can't offer solutions or can't offer ideas for problems to try to address, but it's really important that young people are a part of the team from the very beginning, and that their voices are really honored, because that's the way that you're really going to get to the solutions that are going to be the most benefit to young people, because they've envisioned them themselves. And that also when you're talking about your message strategy, that those messages are genuine, because they're coming from young people who have envisioned the solutions already themselves. And so it's not handing a young person a message that you want them to say in front of a camera. It's really a solution, it's a message that's based on a solution that young people have come up with themselves. They've been a part of the conversation, and they're also carrying this message forward as the messenger. And that will have such an impact on the way that message is received, because people really, again, make decisions based on where their values are, and if they know that these solutions are coming directly from youth, they're going to be even more inspired to get involved.
Thank you, Ingrid. Another question was about the illustrate the landscape of a strong element on your what can we do slide. Can you tell us more about what the strong elements are that you're referring to there?
Yes, and I'm just going back to that slide. Illustrate the landscape with story elements. So we didn't have a chance to get into too much in depth on this webinar on story elements. Essentially, story elements are a few different things. Authentic voices, essentially this idea of youth, or I should say any other person in a position of experience with a certain problem or challenge is considered an authentic voice. So young people, obviously, who are affected by lack of safe places to play and healthy food access are affected by the problem. Parents are also affected by the problem. Teachers could also be affected by not having safe schools for their students, or not having water fountains in their schools. Public health professionals also could be authentic voices who are speaking from a research perspective. So anyone who is in a position of experience, whether it's personal or professional, who can speak to your issue, who may be a good messenger for your advocacy, for your systems change efforts, may be considered an authentic voice. The other story elements, and we'll get into this more again in the in-person trainings. Social math is the idea of, when we talked a little bit about data and how data can be incorporated, but sort of secondary to the values piece. But we want to make sure that data is digestible, and we want to make sure that people really understand the numbers that you're presenting to them, and that they're not so out of context that they don't mean anything. So when we talk about social math, we talk about bringing numbers down to sort of a more manageable number for most people to understand, rather than talking about how much marketing companies pay in billions of dollars in marketing junk food every year. We want to talk about what is it by the hour that your kid might be watching television while you're getting dinner ready. You know, what is the What are the number of students maybe that could fill a classroom that are affected by a specific problem, something that someone can visualize. So it's really a creative way to present data. What are some of our other story elements? Visuals are an important story element when you think about either a photo opportunity if you're holding an event, or if you have been interviewed for an article, you might want to ask what graphic may go along with the article, and if you have some graphics that could present your data or present an image that reflects the issue that you're working on, that could be a good idea. When we talk about holding events and sort of photo opportunities, we want to make sure that we're showing the solution that we want to see. Most of the time, people are seeing photos of the problem, which is important, but we also want to show what is the solution that we envision. And so how can we create a visual that will help people see that solution? So those are some examples of story elements. Again, these are ways that you can make your story more engaging so that when you're either talking to your audience or if you're talking to the media, they are really getting a picture of what you're talking about. They have the strongest messenger possible, et cetera. And again, we're going to talk more about that in those in-person trainings.
Thank you, Ingrid. I think I have one more question, and it's actually a two-part question. The first part, I think our team on this side can handle, and the question was, who is best to send to the in-person trainings? And just to kind of reiterate for those that are on this call, these trainings are open to all of our network contractors and their partnering youth-serving organizations. So at the network, we're always encouraging you to partner with other organizations to help push your PSC strategies. So as you're partnering with other youth-serving agencies, please share the advertisements for these upcoming trainings with them so that we can help share this great knowledge with them as well. The other part of the question was how will the content from this webinar directly reflect or build into the in-person trainings? Ingrid, you can kind of speak to that a little bit more than me.
Sure. So this was just sort of meant to be an introduction to strategic messaging, strategic communications around system change approaches. And so this will be the language and the concepts that we talked about in this webinar, especially related to messaging and values, will sort of be the foundation for the in-person trainings. But we're going to be doing much more hands-on practice so that at the end of the day, you will really have much more of a sense of how to literally put pen to paper to sort of develop these messages, to think strategically about your systems change goals and how strategic communication fits in. So you can think of this as sort of a primer, but we're going to really dig deep on some of the skills that are necessary to implement some of these ideas that we talked about today.
Okay. It looks like we have another question from Elisa for the actual dates for the in-person trainings. Save the dates for all of those events will be coming out shortly. They are being held in August. Yeah, rather than getting your calendars mixed up with giving you the wrong dates at this point, I would much rather send you all the save the dates so that you have firm email record of when those dates are happening. But you can mark your calendars in August. The first, second, and fourth week of August, there will be in-person trainings in Monterey, Contra Costa, and San Bernardino. Any other questions? If you have last-minute questions, to send them to myself or myself being the Network for a Healthy California and Ingrid, the host. I think we are trickling down. Yeah, Ingrid, I don't think we have any more questions at this point.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps us up. I'm just going to forward us to the final slides. And Mitra, I believe you provided all the contact information already. Is that right?
I did. Thank you.
Okay. So I think that wraps up. We're ending a few minutes early. Usually that's not a problem for busy folks. But please do get in touch with any of us, either at the Network for a Healthy California or Berkeley Media Studies Group, with additional questions. If you have a specific area of interest that you would like to focus on in the in-person trainings, we're happy to hear those suggestions, or let us know about any other sort of strategic communications questions or dilemmas you are working on. We're really excited to be a part of this partnership. Keep up the good work. Here's all of our BMSG contact information as well. Thanks, everyone.